Prologue. "Margie, how about another slice of your pie?" Hank Peterson was perched on his usual stool at the far end of the diner's counter, an empty pie plate and an open newspaper set out in front of him. He'd been there for hours. "It's Friday afternoon, and I'm celebrating the end of another grueling week." Margie, rolling her eyes to a customer at the opposite end of the counter as she refilled his coffee, called over her shoulder, "You've been retired for 11 years, Hank. You're not celebrating, you're just a fat old man who can't resist a lady's pastries." Margie had been working at Annabelle's apron for a long time, since before Annabelle herself had passed on, and after so long working in a diner in a small town like West Haven, or any diner for that matter, you develop a certain rhythm, come to expect a certain pattern of events, causes, and effects. You learn types of people and how to play off them, much the same way a bartender might as he pours libations and hopes large tips will pour out of wallets afterward. There's a routine, not just for Margie, but for the customers as well. Everyone knows how to play along. Everyone learns the rules of the game eventually. Which was why it struck a bit of a chord with Margie when her jest at Hank Peterson caused zero reaction from the man from whom she'd poured fresh coffee. The two other waitresses, both currently huddled in a back booth together, counting their day shift tips as they waited for the dinner crowd to start its trickle through the door, had laughed loudly and giggled at Hank's expense, and from through the food window, Margie had heard the cook give a grunt of approval at the joke. The only other customer in the diner, a young teacher from the elementary school whose name Margie was kicking herself for not being able to remember, looked up from the paperback she was reading as she sipped her hot tea and picked at a salad and offered a polite smile in Margie's direction. Everyone reacted, because that's what you did. Whether you found the joke to be truly amusing or simply adequate, you either laughed or offered a small chuckle, or, like the young teacher reading the book, you smiled politely and then went back to your business. That was the rhythm. That was the routine. Everyone knew it. The man at the end of the counter had acted as though he'd never even heard Margie's words. Come to think of it, aside from his order of coffee and a cheeseburger, the man had said nothing at all. Hank Peterson, using one liver-spotted hand to pat his bulging belly, winked at her and said, "Never could resist nothing of yours, Margie." Margie groaned. The waitresses laughed again. Rhythm. Routine. Nothing from the man at the other end of the counter. Margie put the coffee pot back on the burner and made a show of turning her back to Hank Peterson to examine a stack of receipts on the counter near the cook's window. But while her head was bent toward the papers, her eyes were shifted upward, taking a nice hard look at the man who hadn't so much as grinned at her in Hank's exchange. Sizing him up, Margie realized the man looked extremely tired. Not just tired. Beaten down, maybe even demoralized. He could have been 50, but the deep creases and lines of worry embedded in his forehead and around his eyes made him look even older. His hair was thick, but fully gray, hanging sloppily down around his ears and into his eyes. Margie had noticed him brushing it back out of the way as he'd taken the first bite of his burger. He wore faded blue jeans with a black sweater, along with a threadbare blue sport coat that was either a cheap hand-me-down that had never fit right, or the man had lost a great deal of weight recently. He looked skeletal inside the fabric. As he sat hunched over his half-eaten burger, eyes down, hair splayed across his forehead, Margie suddenly felt an overwhelming sense of sorrow for the man, and she scolded herself for initially considering him rude. It hadn't even been that good of a joke. She and Hank Peterson went after each other every day, and this most recent exchange wouldn't even crack the list of their top 50 all-time hits. She was better than this. The man deserved better than this. "Margie, my pie?" Hank Peterson said from his stool, his voice sensing something off in his longtime diner pal. Rhythm. Routine.